on our first public meeting and build from that and foster an even better conversation with what we have to show you today. So thanks everybody for joining us. I'm going to turn it over to our interpreter for our language statement.
Hello, everyone. My name is Gisela Escobedo, and I'm here with the Community Language Co-op. And I want to say thank you to the organizers of this event for practicing language justice. Thank you for giving an opportunity where people can participate and engage in the language of their heart, the language that they feel most comfortable in, or the language that they practice at home. So to create this space, we're going to be using simultaneous interpretation. So when I finish saying this in Spanish, we will turn on interpretation and you will see a globe icon on the bottom of your bar that says interpretation. You are going to click on it and you're going to select your preferred language. If you're bilingual, you don't have to select any language. You can also mute original audio so you don't hear both languages at the same time. If you are joining us today from a phone or a tablet, it has 3 dots that says more. You can go ahead and click on it and select your language as well. A few things to remember, if you're going to be presenting or facilitating, please be aware of your speed, knowing that Spanish takes around 20 to 25% longer than English. Hola a todas las personas, mi nombre es Gisela Escobedo y estoy aquí con la Community Language Co-op y quiero darle las gracias a los organizadores de este evento por practicar la justicia del lenguaje. Gracias por crear un espacio donde todas las personas pueden participar e involucrarse en el idioma de su corazón, en el idioma que practican en casa o el idioma en el que se sienten más cómodos. Para crear este espacio vamos a estar usando la interpretación simultánea. Así que cuando termine de decir esto, van a aprender interpretación y usted va a ver un icono de un globo en la barra de abajo de su pantalla que dice interpretación. Si no eres completamente bilingüe, te pido que selecciones ahí, le des un clic ahí y selecciones tu idioma preferido. Si estás hoy desde un teléfono o una tableta, vienen 3 puntitos que dicen más o more. Dale un clic ahí y de ahí puedes seleccionar interpretación y tu idioma preferido. Si eres bilingüe, pues no necesitas usar este servicio. También puedes silenciar el audio original para que no escuches ambos idiomas al mismo tiempo. Si vas a estar presentando, por favor, sé consciente de tu velocidad. Cualquier pregunta nos puedes hacer saber. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much. You can go ahead and turn on interpretation.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm doing a couple of things at once here. So, all right. So today's agenda, welcome back. And we're going to go through some really exciting concepts that Livable Cities, our consultant, has put together for us. Before that, we're going to look at the schedule and where we're at right now for the entire project, and also go over a lot of the survey results and the public outreach summary from the first public meeting and all the great feedback we got with our online survey. This is the project schedule. You can see we are here at public meeting number 2. We will have another online survey that will open, that is open, excuse me, and will run through the middle of June. And that will also be promoted by our council office through their monthly newsletter. So I'd really encourage everybody to get on there, and we will share a link, which is also available on our website. And there is a There are also yard signs posted in the park, which have a QR code, which you can access the survey that way as well. And then just as a reminder here, after the second public meeting and survey, we'll go into final design, which will take us through early 2023. And then we'll be able to send the project out for bidding and construction. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Livable City Studios to go over the survey results.
Great, thanks, Brittany. Hello, everyone. I am Meredith Winskowski with Livable City Studio. And we're just going to start by giving you a quick overview. Brittany, if you can advance to the next slide, and we can see that Teams thing. So if you want to shift that, that's okay. I want to give you kind of an overview of what we heard from the survey last time and really how that has informed our concepts and what we're going to show you tonight. So this first slide, we always like to kind of start with, some of the just the respondents at the survey, kind of the numbers, who really did respond. And so we had the survey open for a number of weeks, late April, as you all know, if you took it. In total, we had 190 responses to the survey and 85% completion rate. So we just like to look at some of this data. It was really exciting to see that most of the people that responded to the survey live near the park. So, within kind of 1 mile of the park, 71% of the people, then 27% between 1 and 3 miles. So definitely, living in the neighborhood and nearby were most of the respondents. You can see on the right side of the screen, we asked about age, and so 58% were under the age of 44. So kind of, all ages represented, but definitely more in that kind of age bracket. And then on the race and ethnicity front, you can see the respondents as well. So 77% white, and then 26% Hispanic, Latino. So, we see a little bit of differences here from the neighborhood demographics, which is why it's really always important to get this data and help frame this moving forward. Next. So some of the questions we asked on the survey. First, on the left there, we asked how you want to enjoy the park. And the top 3 responses, we heard that people really want to walk, run, or bike through the park, relax in the natural environment, and you'll see some of those ideas come up later, as well as play and kind of active recreate. So really some kind of themes here that in the threads of these responses that helped guide us. We asked also, what improvements would you like to see in the play area? And 38% of the respondents said play elements tailored to multiple age groups. Shade and seating were also themes at the playground, as well as in other areas too. On the right there, what features should accommodate should the playground accommodate, excuse me. And the top 3 really being hillside play elements, swing or kind of motion elements, and then climbing structures, which we hear a lot of these days. The active kind of play and recreation, the climbing is really great. So again, kind of you'll see some of these ideas later. Next. There we go. Thanks. So we also asked, what improvements would you like to see in the shade structure and gathering area? And I mentioned kind of the views and the seating. Well, those were clearly the top 2. So a variety of seating types and maximizing the beautiful mountain views from the park were the clear front runners there. What activities should the shade structure accommodate? Again, seating, or here shaded seating specifically, and the overlooking views. So you can see the clear themes of seating and views really capturing kind of those inherent great characteristics of the park. Next. We asked which type of shade structure feels most appropriate. So looking at kind of the different character of these shade structures and how they function. And you can see of the top three, the character images there and what they reflect. So the top one is more of a traditional picnic or shade structure. 22% of the people responding preferred that. Contemporary picnic shade structure, we had about 18% respond to that one. But the clear priority was a shade structure that was really about kind of multiple spaces. And so this is really focused on, numerous groups or a lot of people being able to kind of gather in this space. That was the clear priority. Next. We also asked, what improvements or new elements would you like to see in the park's natural areas? And I'll just kind of hit on the top ones here. I think wildlife habitat and new trees for shade were really the top two, and the green and the blue bars. Dog waste pickup, shown there in the yellow, and then nature play elements in that kind of teal blue. So, but clearly in the top three, wildlife, new trees for shade, and the dog waste pickup were the priorities. Next. And so just to kind of summarize, what we've heard and how we use that moving forward in the design, overall in the shade structure and some of the gathering spaces, very clear to prioritize the really beautiful mountain views that the park has, and design for and plan for these picnic, shade structures that have multiple spaces and can accommodate numerous groups. And then the feedback on the playground is really helping guide us because the interests are clearly in that hillside play. So the kind of the slide idea, swings, and other climbing elements. And I think that is all on the survey data. Will?
Thanks, Meredith. So I am Will Vietanen with Livable City Studio. I'm going to walk through a couple alternatives that we have, and I'll kind of briefly sort of describe for each, like an overview of some of the site strategies we looked at, and then also kind of dive into the details of, the differences, and then how the public feedback that Meredith just walked through is kind of reflected in how we address that. So let me see if I can advance the slide myself. There we go. So the first alternative, we're calling this play loop, and really it's focused around coupling a shade structure and plaza area, or kind of gathering space directly adjacent to a variety of play areas, and really looks at the current conditions on the site, as we talked about in the first public meeting, are these two active spaces, being the existing pavilion and the playground, separated by 8 feet of grade change and isolated from each other. Limited seating is provided around the current playground, and access between the two is really just not direct in general. So at a base, this first concept really looks at working with some of the existing circulation framework, but addressing some of the grades and locating the primary play area at elevation closer to the shade structure, and kind of leveling things out a bit there, such that you can then create a broader loop that connects these spaces together and have some direct connections between the programs. I will say for both concepts that we'll look at, we'll kind of dive into detail on the kind of center of the park, being the playground and the shade structure itself, and some of those programs. but I want to just highlight both alternatives. We're looking at also kind of creating a new path on the north side of the park, a soft surface trail, and you know, activating some of the existing soft surface trails with various pause places that, you know, would have different bench and seating options, as well as you know, waste and potentially even interpretive signage. But those are kind of shown in this plan, sort of with that blue kind of shape, the ellipse itself. And then on the proposed north side trail, we're actually looking at pulling from the habitat feedback that we received from the initial survey, you know, creating a node around the existing fallen cottonwoods that are shown with number 8, just right where the north side of the park bends. There are a bunch of remnant cottonwood logs, and we're looking at creating sort of a pause place and potential outdoor classroom seating area there. And then what's shown in 7 on the east side of the proposed kind of soft surface trail would be some sort of pollinator habitat. We're calling it a Pollinator Hotel, but where it also becomes an opportunity to have little, you know, interpretive kind of houses for bees and butterflies and things like that. And all of that's to build on the existing shown in 9. There's the bird houses on the existing pole that's kind of in the middle of the field there. And we're looking at how can we kind of build sort of on that ecological and environmental story on that north side. So I just wanted to kind of talk through that before we dive into detail for both options, because those kind of thoughts sort of apply to both of them, and the differences in the concepts are really in the center of the park itself. So on the next slide, this is kind of a zoom in of that central you know, portion of the park, and I'll kind of walk you through some of the improvements here. So I mentioned the looping kind of path that would be fully accessible and connect all of the play spaces. So on the west side in this plan, we've located the shade structure a little pretty close to where it is today, but with an expanded footprint. And again, slightly lowering the elevation so that we can work the grades around it and kind of create that looping path, but still having the direct mountain views west and southwest. And then on the south side of the shade structure and kind of seating area, we're looking at, as I mentioned, lowering the shade structure patio so that we can essentially pull back the grade and create sort of a terrace seating area that would also provide kind of informal seating, looking west, looking south at the kind of naturalized landscape to the south, and provide seating also for parents for looking after kids in the nature play or the hillside and school age playground areas. Additionally, one thing to point out with this concept, the looping path really kind of ties together all the play spaces, but the pavilion itself, or the shade structure, is also really closely located to the playground. So in contrast to the existing, you know, playground and shade structure area, you can't really access those without dropping 7-8 feet. This looks at really kind of flattening things out a bit there, and addressing the grade solely on the south side of the proposed loop path. And in that south area, we would have sort of a hillside play, climbing, and, you know, scrambling up natural materials, and then a lower kind of flattened landing nature play area itself. So that would take advantage of the existing kind of footprint of the playground as it stands today, but actually pushing it slightly in north and west away from the existing trees that are there, and also providing some proposed trees that can help to better shade some of these active spaces. Lastly, on this concept, we did hear that the east side, as you kind of come from South Irving Street, should have some sort of entry kind of thoughtful planting, as the west side has the two different LAs from the lindens and the crabapple trees. And so here we're proposing to kind of really, have a defined and formal entry on that east side that kind of connects and creates that future address of the Loretto Heights campus to the east. So on the bottom, you can see a few, images of the programs that we're thinking about in these spaces. So the shade structure, as Meredith mentioned, open and kind of generous, but flexible with not just one type of, seating, like picnic table, but potentially having some variability in the different heights of seating elements and ledges. The terrace seat walls that are shown just to the right of that, those are actually, we're thinking potentially natural materials like stone slabs, and really having them sit and they're embedded into the grade. And then on this one, swing elements being a little more contemporary and not traditional. Just the way that the play spaces, the school age and the early childhood play areas can fit here. It works better to not have a traditional swing set just with the grades. And then natural kind of play elements from potentially a natural wood structure that you can climb in and through and over, and some sort of scramble with an embankment slide. And then lastly, some climbing elements that again kind of land on that hillside area so that you can really have fun and experience the grade and look to the west. One last thing that I'll point out here, the play areas are also kind of separated by age and by use, so that it kind of creates a little bit of a circuit to move around through, but you also have spaces that are basically designated somewhat for early childhood or like a tot lot, so that you don't have conflicting use potentially. I mean, school-age children will probably explore all of these areas. However, it's good to have a home base and also incremental challenge introduced into play spaces. So that's kind of the first alternative. And then, oh, actually, we're going to do a quick polling question. So Meredith, do you want to kind of walk us through this?
Yep. Yeah, sure. So we just want to kind of pause for a second and get some feedback on this alternative before we jump to the next one. So we'll have live polling pop up in just a minute. We can flip back to the plan as well, so you can, as you're trying to answer it. But we want to hear, what do you like most about alternative one? So that's the one that we'll just walk through. So the options being the structure and plaza being adjacent to the playground, so how they're that proximity there. 2 is the terrace seating south of the structure with views to the mountains. 3, the loop path linking together the playground and gathering spaces. 4, large hillside play taking advantage of slope around existing playground. And 5, the play elements using natural materials, or 6 other. So if Jesus, you want to launch the live polling, everyone should have that pop up now, and you can see, take a minute to kind of read through those. I'll repeat them once more for the interpreter. So 1 is the structure and plaza being adjacent to the playgrounds. 2, the terrace seating south of the structure with views to the mountains. 3, the loop path linking together the playground and gathering spaces. 4 is the large hillside play taking advantage of the slope around the existing playground. 5, play elements using natural materials, and 6 is other. So Will, if you want to flip back to the plan view, if you still have control real quick, so they can see it as they're trying to respond here. This should be a single choice response. And, if there's something else you like or something that may concern you about this concept, feel free to throw it in the chat, because we would also love to hear any additional thoughts and maybe something we're not thinking about, anything that concerns you, so we really can understand your preferences. So we'll give you all just a bit longer here. With about half of the people having responded. So we'll give it more time till we have everybody or close to everybody. I see one comment that came in, which is great, and we can talk about that. Feel free to add anything else. So we have a few more trickling in. If anyone else wants to get in their response on the live polling, that would be great.
And Meredith, I did close the polling.
Oh, I see.
Just
yes. Thank you. I didn't even notice the share
yeah.
results. Yeah, do you want to go ahead and share them?
I will share the results, that way people could see. The other thing, thank you for everyone who's putting in the chat. If you do have a question about this or would like to, make a comment, please raise your hand and we'll unmute you. That way we're, your neighbors and the design team is able to hear you and respond to you directly.
Great. So as everyone can see, 53% of you responded with a terraced seating south of the structure with views to the mountains. So very common themes from what I shared earlier in the survey results, the seating and the views to the mountains. But a few things that came through the chat, a great comment from David about the shade structure being solid, not open in case there's rain. And it looks like some people agreeing with him. The hillside play, I chose the hillside play, but love the nature play elements. David also likes the cut stone seating wall. People responding, they like all of them. And I see the comment in here about bathrooms, and I'd like to, maybe we can hold that until the end. We can come back. We're going to do questions and answers at the end, and maybe we can talk about that at that point in time. So with that, let's dive into alternative 2, and we'll do a similar question after Will goes through the concept.
Perfect. Thanks, Meredith. So this second concept, really we're calling Picnic Forest, which maybe is very enticing. I think it sounds really nice and pleasant, but what this one looks at is really trying to take advantage of some of the underutilized spaces within the park, in particular, the lawn that is just to the south of sort of the main kind of entry from South Irving Street, the existing path connection. There are a number of very mature oak trees, and it's nicely kind of open and just really has generous shade in there. And so this option looks at, well, how can we kind of address both that east and north side of kind of where the current pavilion and playground sit, as well as try to maintain some of the views and also take advantage of the slope. So for this one on the next slide, we'll kind of dig into the specifics, but the main kind of circulation move is creating a connecting path and entry from South Irving Street. And this really considers the future improvements to Loretto Heights campus and what's under construction there, and the increased kind of just a number of park visitors who are going to come crossing across Irving Street and land in the park. And so rather than tie into the existing kind of circulation on the west side of the pavilion, this proposes an entirely new circuit from Irving all the way to the existing recreation lawn on the west side of the park, and locates the shade structure actually east of that slightly. And then has a series of braided kind of circulation loops around the different programs. So I would say this one's a little more connected just in general from the east side of the park and tying into the west. Now, one of the benefits of that is, thinking about future connections and, biking through the park. It also, though, will bring, additional traffic to some of these spaces. So that's maybe a consideration to think about here. The shade structure being shifted to the east, given the Linden LA that's just kind of on the southwest side of the parking and runs kind of northeast. It then orients your view southwest a little bit more so than the other alternative. Northwest, excuse me, because it's southeast. So you're looking a little northwest and you don't have as long of a view to sort of the south side. Then the structure itself and the way that it sits with the paths around it actually spills out both to the west and to the east, and looks to really be flexible and kind of use that to its advantage. So rather than just a fairly traditional kind of structure that can be approached from one side, this would be open, and that would have some implications in terms of how it's permitted, but also could really make it feel connected to some of the other programs. So just to the west of the structure, we're actually proposing, rather than kind of, terracing down, they're just kind of grading down a little bit, but creating an additional lawn space that could kind of spill out and actually would serve as kind of an informal place that connects these different play areas. So just to the south of the lawn, taking advantage of that existing hillside, would be some of the hillside climbing elements we talked about in the previous option, but not as low on the hill. It would kind of just activate the existing edge of the existing playground itself, and wouldn't put you as close to the southeast corner of the current playground. Then north of the proposed lawn would be sort of that school age playground. But the way that this lays out, and with the grade, we could actually then have more traditional swings, probably a more traditional shade structure, play structure with various kind of platforms, and it just lays out a little bit differently from a playground perspective. And then similarly, just north of that would be the early childhood play area, which we're also thinking might be a little more traditional in this option. The play spaces, the early childhood and school age playground being closer on the west, are maybe more accessible from the parking lot to the west. However, from our survey responses from the first survey, most of the responses were actually coming from those who are within 2 miles, like 75% roughly. And so we imagine that most are actually accessing through just walking. So then additionally, then to the east of the structure, the shade structure and seating area would be that picnic forest and kind of rec lawn, where we're proposing a number of additional trees, and then sort of picnic pods, which there currently are a couple picnic tables that have sort of a pad, but they don't have a grill area. They don't have a work surface or anything like that. But what I mean is like a prep surface or a standing kind of ledge element or anything like that. So we're kind of envisioning these as little rooms, like social nodes. Some attach themselves to the paths themselves so that they're fully accessible, and maybe those are larger and have different seating. And then some are isolated and kind of really tucked into the lawn itself. As I mentioned, there are multiple spaces kind of around the shade structure, and the circulation really invites a little bit of a different energy than the last option or the previous concept. And let's see if there are any other points I wanted to hit on the right. And then the play areas themselves, Again, being on the sort of the west, they're closer to the parking, but they're also a little more flat. So really the only area that would address the grade itself of the site would be that hillside play area. Otherwise, this kind of tries to put the play areas pretty level with each other. It puts them north of the structure, so you still have those views, but they're not as directly supported by the shade structure itself. So if you're sitting in the shade structure or around it, you're actually a little bit removed from the play itself. So then on the bottom, like film strip again, you can see sort of open shade structure. I mentioned more traditional swing and traditional play elements. And then that picnic forest and rec lawn or gathering lawn area, again, sort of social nodes that maybe have additional kind of amenities to support picnicking while creating, opportunity for larger but informal gatherings. And then again, sort of nature playing climbing elements on that hillside kind of play area. So I think similar to the last concept, we'd like to do a quick polling question and get some feedback on, what you all think of some of these opportunities.
Great. So yeah, next polling question is same question, just different options. So what do you like most about alternative 2? The number 1 is the shade structure opening to the lawn area. Number 2, the gathering area and picnic forest. 3, the proximity of the playgrounds to the parking lot. 4, more direct pathway connection from South Irving Street. 5, more traditional play elements. Or 6 is other. Maybe in that case, you can add them to the chat. So Jesus, you want to go ahead and launch the poll? You all can take a minute to answer. So I'll just read them again for the interpreter. The first one is the shade structure opening to the lawn area. The second one is the gathering area and picnic forest. The third is the proximity of the playgrounds to the parking lot. The fourth is more direct pathway connection from South Irving Street. 5 is more traditional play elements. And the 6th and last is other. So you can add your thoughts to the chat. And we certainly realize as we're asking this, we're asking you what you like the most. And it does require you to pick one. While I know that there were some other comments in chat about, really liking everything. So feel free to, add any of that into chat so that we really understand your preferences. There's another question in chat about, are these choices, is it one or the other, or is it possible to combine parts? And it's certainly possible to combine parts, kind of the favorite elements. I think that's part of our design process and why we're asking you the questions we're asking you tonight, to really understand what are your favorite aspects of each of these alternatives. And ideally there's some, source of kind of a blending the two and taking the favorite elements and turning it into the preferred alternative. So with that, Jesus, thank you. I see that you closed the poll. This one, 42% said the gathering area and the picnic forest. And then we had 21% at the shade structure opening to the lawn and 16% at traditional play. So I hear, a comment coming in about, I much prefer the first alternative, the picnic area, and alternative 2 is great, but don't love adding another lawn. Another comment about, I think the more traditional play elements are too boring. I like making use of the hill for some interesting climbing opportunities. And there was some comments back there that maybe we can talk about in Q&A a little bit about the playground and nearby kids and what they might want. So with that, I think we will we'll keep moving the presentation, and then, like I said, we're going to have a Q&A kind of open at the end where we can dig into this a little bit more.
So this slide really is just, we'll kind of show this again at the Q&A, but we really just kind of wanted to flash and show them side by side and kind of, again, just highlight some of the differences. But I think what we're hearing is, again, opportunity and, maximizing the views as well as taking advantage of the hillside from both play and seating. Additionally, linking or connecting some of the play spaces, but in a fun and maybe more dynamic way. And that also applies to the elements themselves. So having them maybe less traditional and maybe more exciting. I think that there's some, positive feedback at this point towards, additional nodes and seating areas, but, how we can do that responsibly, and maybe I think there was a couple comments geared towards, maybe not adding a lawn. I will just provide one clarification in the second alternative itself. You can actually see the footprint of the lawn areas as they are today, which is shown in that green, and they're very close to the same. And in fact, what's out there today is a lawn space that is just underutilized and not quite activated. So we're not really adding, but if there is opportunity to, or we kind of get direction that maybe some of that space could be converted to something else, or doesn't want to be lawn, we could look at that as well. So again, we'll talk through that during the Q&A, but just wanted to have these side by side. And now I think on the next sort of chapter of this meeting, we'd like to talk about sort of lawn and sort of landscape conversion, and Denver Parks and Rec, they're kind of moved towards sort of the one water or every last drop kind of mission. So Ian will kind of speak to that. So let's go.
Will, can I just chime in here really quick? Especially with the concepts, we wanted to give Councilman Flynn, who I know has to go. He was going to do a welcome at the beginning, but he's been chiming in on the chat on some of the things that he agrees with or some of the things that he likes. So I just like to give him an opportunity to, to say some quick words before we get into this conversation, if that's possible. And Councilman, you don't have to you should be able to mute yourself. You don't have to tell us what your preference is, but any things that you're liking about either of the concepts, or reiterate some of the things that you're agreeing with residents.
Thank you, Jesus. I do have to run to a neighborhood meeting in about 12 minutes, so thank you for the opportunity. What I'm really liking about this actually is the incredible number of people who are here representing different segments of the community. What I see in the attendees, I see a couple of neighborhood presidents from College View, from South Marley, Brentwood, Sharon Park. I see residents from across the street. Phil, I see you. Sharon, I see you. I see Sister Lydia here from Sisters of Loretto. What I'm liking about this, Jesus, and to the Livable Cities team, is that you are listening to people. And I was out at Loretto Heights Park today, and frankly, don't tell people from any other park in the district, but I think Loretto Heights Park is one of the jewels of Southwest Denver, the remarkable views. And I like that these alternatives preserve those views to the west and southwest. They're just incredible and profound, especially looking down on the field of stone in Fort Logan National Cemetery and out to Devil's Head from there. So I just wanted to thank folks for being here and engaging with this. I see some of the steering committee members are also here. Gail, thank you. And with that, I have to run off to the Bear Valley neighborhood meeting. But thank you so much for doing this and for coming up with these recommendations, or these alternatives rather. Thank you.
And thank you, Councilman, for taking your time for joining us. You and your office have been great champions, not only of this park, but parks throughout all of Denver. So thank you very much for your work.
Thank you. And Stacy Simonet, my aide, is here as well. She'll remain on while I go to Bear Valley. Take care.
Thank you, Will and Meredith. If we want to move to the landscape.
Yeah, sure thing. Thank you, everybody, for kind of introducing the more playground themed concepts in relation to this park. I think we can advance to the next slide to actually see Loretto Park here. So this is a current aerial image of Loretto Park right now. As we can see, I'd like to draw some of your attention to some different edge parcels of the park right now. You can kind of see through the color gradient what some of the more natural landscapes or open spaces, however you want to call them, are outlined within the park system currently. And then if you look towards the very western portion of the park, a little north of the parking lot, you can see some areas of turf grass that are actually not doing very well in this image. Part of that is from the different climactic patterns that we're seeing here in the city. So in seeing these images, Denver Parks is trying to adapt and more adaptively manage our park spaces to help address some of those drought concerns and issues. So looking at that western portion there and then going up into the northwest, those were currently turf grass areas now. And there's one other area I'd like to draw your attention to, which is the eastern portion of the park, where you can see a little bit of green, but then there is some more brown native grasses just north of there. And that is also an area that is currently turf. But we can see that there's some stress taking place along the trees there. So if we want to go to the next slide after getting this current understanding of the park space, just to highlight what some of the benefits of actually having a habitat conversion take place are. And when we say habitat conversion, in this instance, we're referring to looking at ways to incorporate more native species into traditional turf grass areas. So some of the benefits of this are, one, species diversity. So that means having different height gradients in a park. So adding a little bit of imagery and granularness to the park space. And you can see that in the image off to the right here, where we have the turf grass lawn, and then we have the different heights of grasses and forbs and wildflowers and trees in these sections here. So all of that is enhancing that biodiversity and adding some structure and also flowers and color to park spaces. So we'll have different types of color represented in these areas as well. It won't just be green, or it won't just be brown. An additional benefit to this is water conservation. As Will was referencing, we have the one drop principle that was adopted in our game plan for a healthy city, and that is to try and be as water wise as possible. And as Denver Parks being the largest customer of Denver Water, we really have a responsibility to try and cut down on our water use as much as possible. And these native landscapes use quite a bit less water and irrigation than the turf grass areas. So finding suitable locations where turf grass is already struggling that we can implement and start planting native species can really help us meet those goals outlined through the game plan for a healthy city. Additionally, there's a scenic benefit to having healthy native landscapes. Again, we're adding a gradient and a height change to a landscape. So it allows us to use our eyes and engage with the space much more actively than just a turf grass lawn. I already touched on drought resistant, so I won't worry about too much going over that one again. And then that ties directly into enhanced ecosystem services. So those are going to be components of drought resistance and water conservation, but then also air quality, enhanced room for pollinators. So if anybody has gardens in their backyard, the natural and open spaces here will support a larger array of native pollinators that will be also pollinating your flowers. And if you have any vegetables, your vegetables. So all of those kind of things. In addition to water filtration. So I know there is some waterways that come right down very near some of the homes, and then having these different types of species here will help with filtering that water out, enhancing water quality, and then also slowing that water down and mitigating any sort of flood events. On the flip side of that as well, if we're talking about water, I think it's also important to draw some attention to fire as well. And healthy native landscapes are quite resistant to fire taking place in an area. So by having native landscapes, we are cutting down on those annual weedy species that are going to die off and then provide really good fire fuel. So by having native species that are drought resistant and have a better ability to maintain moisture, we're going to be limiting and mitigating that fire risk in these areas as well. And then additionally, there are kind of new kind of dynamic types of play areas that we can have in native landscapes as well. So it just creates a different way of engaging with a space. Now that we have an idea of some of those benefits, I think it's really important to talk about the timeline of a habitat conversion because it happens very differently than a playground or a walk. So the first component of this is really looking at weed treatments. We want to make sure that we're not going to be supporting the noxious and then undesirable weed species here. So we have to come in and really cut down that seed bank, and that can take at the very least 1 year. Oftentimes it can be up to 2 to 3 depending on what species are there. And then a additional component of habitat conversions is irrigation modifications, and those will kind of happen depending on funding in conjunction with playgrounds and that work, or it may have to happen separately. So that can be a year in and of itself. Then the actual seeding of these areas, which can happen quite quickly if we're in the right seeding window, but we don't want to be seeding right in the middle of summer. It's best to do some seeding earlier in the spring before we get our normal perceived precipitation that we're supposed to be getting in the spring or in the fall, so that seeds can cold stratify. And then after that, we have an establishment period of actually getting all of these plants to germinate and become established and dominant on the landscape. And that really takes a minimum of 3 years. So when we are talking about a habitat conversion, it is very much going to be a phased process. It will not be as quick as the new playground or the new walks in a park system. It's going to take a little bit longer than that, and you'll slowly start to see these changes depending on what habitat conversions are deemed as suitable for this project. Next slide, please.
Sorry.
We can go back to the
Two,
past
for some
one.
reason.
Yeah, no worries. So this is the 2 different concept plans that we've kind of put together for this park so far that Will had talked about. And we just wanted to call out some of those areas that have a potential for landscape conversions to make it very clear where those locations are as you start to think about what concepts you like more. So again, we have those sections of park off to the west where that turf really wasn't doing too well. Those had been potential landscape conversion locations. And then also the very southern portion of the park was picked out as a potential landscape conversion as well. And I think it would be very cool to see what some of those native grasses, native forbs are in that view shed that is so popular in this park. So you'll really have a uninterrupted, beautiful natural landscape for all of the different photographs and stuff like that that will be able to take place from the different new shelter areas and playgrounds that are being proposed. Next slide. I also wanted to spend a little bit of time in the conversation in relation to vegetation thinning precedents. As I'm sure all of you are aware, there's a very dense thicket along an old ditch line in this park. And that thicket is comprised of primarily undesirable or invasive species. So those species are actually choking out some of the more native trees that we have within this ditch line here, right abutting the open space and native areas of this park space. So eventually that highly shrubby, very, very dense vegetation is going to choke out some of the native trees that we have there, and they're going to kill them. So a vegetation thinning process can take place to actually release some of that pressure by removing the invasive shrubby species along this ditch line to enhance the health of the native tree species that are desirable to keep in this area. So I think it's really important to note that there is a composition of undesirable species that are going to be eventually killing some of those highly desirable tree species that we want to keep along this ditch line. And by doing so, vegetation thinning here in this location is going to have a lot of beneficial components to it. So that also being fire mitigation, it will cut down on that level of dry woody material that's available for fire. It will also increase the ecological health by, again, releasing those native species from the pressure of those competitors, and then also opening up this room for a more diverse composition of different types of wildflowers and desirable shrub species. And then also it will enhance public safety by opening up sight lines and visibility in the park so that you can see what's going on in some of those native areas. If your kids want to run and transition to the different side of the park, you'll be able to really see what they're doing over there. And it will also open up the ability to, engage and use some of those spaces around those highly desirable trees. So the precedent, it will affect how this space looks by having a vegetation thinning here. But again, it will really achieve multifaceted goals of fire mitigation, ecological health, and public safety, because we're highlighting those species that are native to this area of Colorado and those trees that are quite stunningly beautiful and dominant in those landscapes.
Thanks, Ian. I appreciate you walking us through that. There's a lot of great information there. And I think we're going to move into the Q&A portion of our meeting. And I think I might need some assistance here monitoring the chat, but I think we want to have everybody raise your hands and we can kind of start.
Yeah, Brittany, I'll chime in and just say if folks want to raise their hand, we can take you off mute if you want to ask your question live. But one thing I did note in the chat, and there were a few recent comments about this. One suggestion was kind of combining, I guess, both of the alternatives to create kind of a new one where you take an alternative one, you take the shelter with some of the retaining walls to sit. And the east half of alternative 2, which is kind of the playground and that added path. So it sounds like, on the alternative 1 area, that shelter and the views overlooking with that playground to the east, and that connection, I think, to South Irving too, is the way I'm reading it. And if I got that wrong or I misunderstood, please clarify. But it seems like there was a number of people jumping in and saying they liked that suggestion as well. Any other thoughts? I see some comments about make the hill sledding friendly and a sport friendly field with eco-friendly aspects that are important to city green spaces. Good comment. some comments about trees that maybe block views upon walking, which is a good thing to think about as we're kind of refining the placement and making sure that we're not blocking all those views, but creating some special moments, but also balancing that maybe with shade a little bit. The question that came earlier in chat, Brittany, that I'll maybe send to you is just the one early about a bathroom.
I can't see the chat. Unfortunately, was it asking if there could be a plumbed restroom at Loretto?
I'm not sure, Sharon, if you're still on and you want to raise your hand, we can unmute you, but she just said kind of bathrooms ?
Okay. So yeah, right now there is a portalet on site, and that is the restroom there. Oh, Will, I see you have your hand raised. Turn it over to you. Oh, is that you, Will?
Oh, he can't unmute himself, I think is the problem. There we go. Will, you're unmuted, I think.
Okay, sorry about that. Jesus, I was trying to message you because I got booted and cannot unmute myself now because I'm not a host. But anyhow, yes, I think the question was about a plumbed restroom. And yeah, sorry, Brittany, I wasn't trying to interrupt your response. I was more so trying to get Jesus's attention.
That's okay. Yeah. So I know that those plumbed restrooms are definitely a really nice amenity to have in a park. And we have actually just completed a restroom master plan, which you can find on our website. And basically that goes through the whole kind of method of determining where we should have plumbed restrooms, where we can support them from a maintenance perspective. And also it addresses some of the issues that we have when we have plumbed restrooms or enclosed spaces in like the downtown parks. So it kind of goes through all of that, but you can get a little bit more information. I do not believe Loretto is identified in that master plan for having a plumbed restroom. Typically, they're going to be large regional parks. So I hope that helps to answer your question.
Great, thanks, Brittany. Two other comments I just noticed in the chat and had missed earlier. A comment from Keith about we do not like the additional path from Irving into the park, but loving the extra picnic tables. So it sounds like there's maybe a little bit of both here. We have some people really liking this path and others that don't like that connection. So if anyone has, wants to explain maybe a little bit more about why that could be really helpful for us, so that we really understand, the reasoning behind that. And then I also see a few comments from Gail and Councilman Flynn agreed with this, that she said, I much prefer the first alternative. The picnic area and alternative 2 is great, but don't love adding another lawn. So that's great feedback.
Yeah, and as Will kind of mentioned too, we just want to clarify too, that's not an additional lawn, it's existing, but really kind of identifying because replacing the irrigation system is part of this project, where we're going to invest those drops of water. So thanks for that, great feedback.
Andrew, I see you have your hand raised. Looks like you're off mute, so feel free to ask your question.
Yeah, no, I was just going to comment on the I don't want to call it dislike, but the preference for the individual or the single path coming from Irving. It almost makes the closed loop in alternative 1 more special to have users kind of use that as their arrival and allow bikers or those passing through to not be, blowing past those who are there to spend time in that special spot within alternative 1. So I'm kind of leaning towards alternative 1 for that entry planting row of trees at the entryway. I think it's wonderful. But I know you've all done a lot of work on this, so I know both options have their benefits. So that's kind of my 2 cents on that. As far as circulation goes too, I'm just curious, my wife and I live about 3 blocks to the west. And when we walk and cross Lowell to get to this park, I was curious to see if your current scope of work extends into Lowell itself and the reason I ask is to ask about some sort of flashing signal at the crosswalk. Has that been considered at all? Because it's a very difficult street to cross on foot, even at the median crossing at the peak of that hill.
I can
Great.
take that one. So thanks, Andrew. That is great feedback. And while we haven't engaged on the Lowell side as much, we are in active conversations with Dottie, who is our Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, formerly Public Works, on the crossing that would be a new crossing from the campus. And part of those conversations, we've talked about a hawk signal or a pedestrian, like a flashing light signal or something like that there. And that conversation has made us aware that there has to be, in order for Dottie to install or allow us to install something like that, they want to see the data behind it first and know that it's justified. So when we're talking about the Irving side and the campus connection, and even getting a flashing light signal there, that's been kind of a sticking point. So I understand that Lowell side is not an ideal crossing, especially with Amherst and how it's not a 90-degree, it's very, so I think, you know, you're coming from the west, folks that are coming from the north have even a little bit more to navigate there. And so we certainly have brought that up to Dottie and said, this is a pedestrian safety concern. But we are limited under their rules and regulations as the owner essentially of that roadway.
Great. Thanks, Brittany. Hey, Anna Claudia, is there anything you wanted to add to that? I don't know if you can.
Yeah, I think Brittany was hit it on all the points on that one. I just want to add that we are working with Dottie right now to come to the best solution as possible for the park users, and that's a priority for us. It's an ongoing work.
Yeah.
Great. And then I'm going to jump to a question that came into chat, and Will, maybe you can jump in and answer this. Can there be more than one pollinator garden area? And will the existing garden plots on the west side go away or be replanted?
Sure, yeah, I can take that one. So I'll kind of start with the existing plots themselves, and actually they are very difficult to maintain. So we kind of talked through this in the first public meeting, and essentially the feedback that we received from both parks operations and maintenance, as well as the public, was that you know, they are valued. However, they're difficult and really just challenging. There are a lot of pests and kind of issues with that. So that is kind of the reason that we were looking at sort of entry planting strategies that would more so be, you know, kind of ornamental trees, potentially fruiting and flowering or something of the kind, and then really tying together that east side in a similar way that the west sides of the park entries are kind of set up, and that's sort of the genesis for the kind of entry LA in both options, though they're configured slightly different. Yeah, and Brittany, if you want to add to that at all, feel free.
Yeah, this is kind of Ian's realm here, so I don't want to speak for him.
Yeah, I was definitely going to chime in on this one and say that although there may not be a formalized horticulturalist bed, as a component of a restoration and conversion project, we strive to include as many wildflower species and flowering species into those habitat conversions and restorations, so that instead of there just being an individualized bed that's providing pollinator habitat, it is actually the entire spaces that are open space habitat, creating opportunities for pollinators to live in. And it's actually providing more for pollinators by doing that, because we're not only creating flowering, which is the food source, but we're also creating resources for them to create, their homes and live in and breed and eat as well. And these native landscapes retain much more moisture and water. So we're also providing water for the pollinators as well. So theoretically, we'll be having even more pollinators because there's more space accessible to them. And right now, I know there's not the greatest diversity of wildflowers in some of these open space sections, but that is a big component of our projects going forward, is increasing that cover of wildflowers.
Great. Thanks. The other thing I just wanted to note is a few more comments came in about just, how the concerns around walking to the park. So that's great to have this in the chat, and, definitely will be taken to, back with the conversations with Dottie. So any other questions or comments from the group?
Merica, I want to answer a comment from Renee about the West Side park fee.
Great, go ahead.
Yeah, so Renee, so the answer is yes. The contribution to the park improvements from the West Side, it will be incorporated into this project. So you're gonna see the benefits of that park fee here and in this project. I also want to clarify that it's not a donation. It is a required parking impact fee that the developer had to pay to parks because of the impact of their new build just next door, and it wasn't required for them to do in order to receive their development rights. I just want to make sure that you guys knew the difference.
Great, thanks, Ana Claudia. Keith, you have a question. Jesus, if you can get him off of mute. There we go. Keith, go ahead.
Keith?
I am not sure he's still on.
Keith,
Looks like
you should be unmuted. If
I'm not sure, he may have dropped off. So Keith, speak up if you are still on. It says mic is not working on my end in the chat. So I think he was having some issues. So he said he'll put his comment in the chat. So we will maybe take Keith's question, and then if there are no others, we'll move to kind of next steps. All right, Brittany, I'm wondering, should we go to next steps? And if Keith gets his comment in the chat, then we can actually, let's pause for a second, because it looks like Mitchell just raised his hand. All right.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Just wanted to make sure. So I'm working over here at Ecology Recreation Center. I'm one of the recreation coordinators that are over here. And so I work pretty closely with the CVNA, the College View Neighborhood Association that's here, and a lot with the community that's here. And something that we've been pushing for here within College View is a community garden that's kind of ran here. And so some of the research that I've done kind of goes along coinciding with what you guys were looking for within using some of this lawn space that we have to utilize less water, because gardens, vegetable gardens and things of that nature use about 50% less water than just having turf out there, right? Grass turf. So I wanted to throw that out there as an option, and then to see if that's something that could be open to having out there. And then also kind of like a community art space that's out there as well, I think would be something that the community would want as well. So not necessarily just all play stuff, right? But something where I don't know what that would entail or anything like that, but we've had people ask us about that before, right? If there could be like some kind of outdoor place where people could congregate and do classes such as yoga and art and other things like that. So those are a couple ideas that we had from people that have come into the rec center.
Mitch, I was going to go and ask you also about a comment you made earlier about the playground.
Yeah.
Do you want to just reiterate that question? I'm not sure if we touched on it.
Yeah, so so we just had a renovation come in right across the street from the rec center, which is kind of like the kids here consider it their playground, right? And it gets a lot of use. But we have an after school program set up with the College View Elementary School, where a lot of those children from that school come over here. And so we'll do park days, right? For some of the after school activities, where it's just some of the times kids need to get outside, right? And they need to just go play on the playground and stuff like that and have that free time. But 9 out of 10 times what they request is that we either do the free time at the school or we walk up to there to do their park time, because they really just don't like what the playground has to offer. And that now maybe a little because it's a little bit small, but I think it's more so just the functionality of it. There's like one little tire swing rope, and the rest of this stuff is it's almost dangerous, and it's really hard for kids to play a game of tag or do things like that where they're chasing each other around and running around and just being kids, right? I've liked some of the stuff where there's some music design around it, and they like that too, but that only entertains them for about 30 seconds. And with the other one that's at the school, there's more places for them to run around and be able to kind of go up and down without having to be worried. Like there's on the way to the slide at the one right across the street from us, it's hard. You got to walk on like a chain tightrope to get to the slide, right? And so none of the girls will do it, and we have to go hold their hands and walk across from that. So I think that's really the biggest concern, is just kids just don't find these like new age funky looking playgrounds kind of fun. It's more dangerous than anything in our minds.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Mitch. I don't know if we had touched on that, but that's quite a bit. Brittany and or Will, I'm not sure if you want to talk on the community gardens and some of the other things that Mitch brought up.
Yeah, I'll jump in there. That's some great feedback, Mitch. Thank you. I know the playground that you're talking about from driving by it, but I've never really gone and investigated, looked at it, and really that's some great feedback. So thanks for that.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think there's a couple pieces I can think of at other playgrounds too, where you try to do something really cool and different, and it doesn't always it's not always executed in the best way. So I think that's very valuable feedback, and we'll make sure that we don't repeat that here.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm not trying to be negative Nancy over here or anything like that. I'm just giving what I've seen kids, right? Because when they built it, I was like, oh, look, this looks really cool. This would be fun. Right. When I was a kid, that was my perspective. The kids that, the kids are ultimately the ones that decide that. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, that's great, Mitch. And sorry, my video is not working right now. This is Will with Livable Cities. And maybe I could have articulated this better. But as Brittany said, absolutely. I think lessons learned, and I'm not familiar with that park and playground space in particular, but absolutely we'll get with Brittany and we'll kind of look at it and evaluate it. And what I should have kind of more clearly described when I was walking through the concepts is, as we kind of talk about these as early childhood areas or, a school age playground, we're breaking these out into different age and challenge groups at a base, just not not to have groups so that they're entirely separate, but so that there is incremental challenge introduced. And then additionally, I can think of a couple other playgrounds around the city that absolutely kind of have these larger kind of combined sort of structural elements and things like that, where there's a lot of activation to it. But again, it kind of, because it's all interconnected and interwoven, it really, the base level of challenge is kind of, it's elevated to, lowest common denominator, basically. So yeah, I think having a daughter who's 18 months and, now looking at playgrounds from a completely different perspective, I think that's really valuable insight too. And I absolutely hear you.
Yeah, cool. Thank you guys. I appreciate that.
Do we want to, were you able to speak anything to the community garden or any of the other aspects Mitch brought up?
Brittany, would you want to touch on the programming just as it relates to, I think that's also something that generally gets evaluated similar to a restroom, just because there's a constant volunteer effort to get that coordinated. And I know we talked about that early on, but maybe you can touch on it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we don't, as far as I know, have like a community garden master plan. It's something that typically the RNO or the residential organization around the park would champion, really. And that's usually the driver for it, from what I understand. So these are, it's important to put them in places that they can be supported and utilized. And it sounds like there's the interest here at Loretto. So thanks for that feedback. And we'll definitely keep it in mind for the long-term plan of the park.
Okay, cool. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate your time, and thank you for hosting this and having this. I think this is a great community input. I've learned a lot about this, so there's a lot of good information. Thank you guys so much.
Great, thank you. Did we have any more comments, or was there anything in the chat? Sorry, Meredith.
Yeah, I was just going to say a few quick chat things and then we'll wrap up with next steps. So Keith, we were waiting for his comment and I'm just going to read it out since I know he couldn't, his mic wasn't working. He says, I wanted to comment on the new entry flow from Irving into the park and agree with Andrew's comments about keeping the interplay loop separate. I also like the tree planting in alternative 1 that keeps more views to the west from the east path from Irving. Thank you, Keith, for sharing that. And then Monica, you had a comment or a question about, you said, I would like to ask about the covered trash cans. This is a continued concern during windy days. Could you kindly respond on that matter? Brittany, is that something you could take?
Yeah, I think we have the barrel trash cans at the park right now. Some of our other parks, we've upgraded to a toter trash receptacle, which does have a top to it. However, it is still open on all 4 sides. The top just connects down from the top. So that might be something that we look into here. I wish I don't know if anyone here from the operations team is on, but I know that they have very specific trucks that have to be paired with specific trash receptacles because that's how they're emptied. So certainly that's a great comment, and we definitely don't want trash blowing around the park. So we'll see if we can upgrade it to the toter system for this one. Thanks.
Great. And let me just, Christopher, apologies. I did miss your comment earlier in the chat, but I scrolled back to it. He was asking, have you considered putting the playground south of the parking on the west side? It would be convenient for parents, families to unload food, coolers, toys, etc. Perhaps a covered area there for them, and having a gorgeous covered area in the center of the park for the adults. Question mark, which would be the best of both worlds. So I don't know, Will, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so I guess from the first kind of public meeting and survey, a lot of the consistent feedback that we were receiving for active park spaces was organized around, maximizing and maintaining views and sort of preserving that. We did talk through, locating, for example, the shelter further to the east by Irving and having, the play areas a little closer to the parking on the west and maybe trying to regrade some of that hillside. But by and large, some of the community feedback at the time was, to really take advantage of the views. Additionally, there was some, feedback around sort of adjacent residents and that lower kind of southwest corner. It's not fully visible from the road. There is some slope to it, kind of stepping down from the parking lot kind of sidewalk edge, and it's currently used as a sledding hill. So there were some challenges there. And then it also, because it's kind of really tucked in there, it's essentially the backyard in kind of on top of those residents who are on the southwest corner of the park itself. And then lastly, there also are some drainage kind of measures there with kind of that being the low point of the park, that a lot of water sort of collects there, and there are actually chases that run through the backyards of a few of those properties. So that's sort of where that conversation kind of led us to more focus energy kind of in the core of the park and really maximize what differentiates Loretto Heights Park from the other, nearby parks in the system. And that's really the views itself. Brittany, if you have anything to add on that, go for it.
I think that was a great summary. But if there's any further questions, let us know.
Great. Well, thanks for all the questions and comments. That was really helpful and a lot of good feedback for us. I think Brittany's going to go over some next steps, and then if there are any additional questions, there's also going to be some emails shared at the end that you can follow up with. So, Brittany.
Thanks. So next steps, please take our new online survey. So you can find that on our website. There's the QR code on the park signs, and then we'll also drop a link in the chat here. And then stay tuned. So we're gonna go back to the drawing board. We're gonna take all of your feedback and come up with a really great final design. And we'll be really excited to share that with you guys once it's complete. And then we'll be able to start bidding in construction. So, and I am a East Colfax resident, but I will be down in Marston or Loretto constantly throughout this project. So really excited to get to these next steps here. If you have any questions, please email me. My email is right up here, but it's also my name, Brittany White @denvergov.org. So please shoot me your questions, comments, and check out our website, the Parks Project page, for any updates. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.
Thanks, everyone.